Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about USC and if they are ready for the Big Ten this upcoming year. Probably not this upcoming year, but I do think down the road they'll be more than fine over there in Southern California. But let's start to break down the Heisman ceremony. And I have a hot take here. I do think there's going to be three positions in New York City for the Heisman ceremony. Now, this is something that sounds a little bit crazy right now because the last couple of years have been pretty much all quarterbacks. A wide receiver here and there. We had Marvin Harrison Jr. a year ago. We've had a running back from time to time, but definitely dominated by quarterbacks. It's become kind of the best quarterback in the country award, but this hasn't happened since 2016, where you had Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield, Jabril Peppers, which is a huge help to this, getting a defensive player in there. Deshaun Watson and Dede Westbrook also made it up to NYC. But the reality is, before 2016, this was happening pretty frequently. In 2009, this happened with Ndamukong Suh making it up there. In 2011 through 2014, this happened. So you had guys like Tyrann Mathieu, you had Manti Te'o helping this out along the way. So having a defensive player helps this a ton, obviously. You know, whenever you can add a player from the other side of the ball to that ceremony, it makes things a little bit easier to get all of these positions in. But the reality is, I could go 4 or 5 positions deep and give you at least a couple of guys that have that shot to win this trophy, and that's exactly what I did. So let's break these down real quick. Quarterback is obviously totally wide open. There's really no other way to put it. This is one where, given any circumstance, a number of guys could be here. Cam Ward could obviously be in the mix. I mean, a number of guys could really make this jump and be a Heisman level quarterback, just because a lot of guys make that jump. I don't think there were a lot of people betting on Jaden Daniels to be your Heisman winner before the season started. And then he came out of nowhere, or not necessarily out of nowhere, but came up and had a remarkable year. So obviously quarterback is wide open. We do have Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck kind of leading the way there, but you could go any number of directions with the quarterback position, and you might have a shot to get in that conversation. We'll definitely have a quarterback there. There's no two ways about that. But then you get to running backs, and this is an absolutely loaded group this year. I think you have at least 5 or 6 guys that could make their way into this conversation. Travion Henderson, Jaden Ott, Amarian Hampton, Ollie Gordon, all of those guys are going to be huge. Quinshon Judkins, another one. And then you have guys like Taj Brooks, Dylan Edwards, maybe Trevor Etienne. All of these guys are capable of having big-time years. Now, it's a little bit harder for some of those other guys. I do think that guys like Jaden Ott, Amarian Hampton, Ollie Gordon, a ton of their offense is going to be predicated on them being big-time players, and I think that obviously lends itself to them being possible Heisman favorites towards the end of the year. When you talk about wide receivers, it starts with Luther Burden and McMillan. There's no two ways about that. Those are going to be the guys that are going to be the most fun to watch. They definitely have that rapport with their quarterback, which helps them be the big-time receiver on their teams and could put up some crazy seasons. And then you have guys like Isaiah Bond that might be able to put up a wild season, Devontae Smith-esque type season, especially with Steve Sarkisian calling plays as he was with Devontae Smith back in the day. Or maybe Emeka Egbuka has a fantastic year for Ohio State. I think both those guys are fairly long shots. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I do honestly kind of like Luther Burden to make his way up to New York at the end of the year, but we'll get into my official predictions a little bit later in the offseason. Edge rusher is another one that I'm watching in particular. James Pierce Jr. and Abdul Carter are two guys that I think definitely have a really big shot to do this, not only because they're incredible rushing the passer, but they're going to be asked to do a lot for their defenses to succeed. And then you have guys like Michael Williams, who I think is going to take a massive step this upcoming year, be an absolute dominant edge rusher for Georgia. And then you have Patrick Payton, who's going to be a huge player for Florida State this upcoming year, likely their best defensive player right now, and definitely will be a huge player for them this upcoming year. And then you get into DBs, and you have Travis Hunter obviously leading the way. When you have a guy that plays both ways, like a Jabril Peppers, it obviously helps that a little bit. And when you talk about the numbers that Travis Hunter can put up, it's going to be better than Jabril Peppers put up. No disrespect to Jabril, he was an incredible player at Michigan, but when you're able to be on the both sides of the ball as much as Travis Hunter is, you have the ability to put up just crazy numbers. So he definitely is leading the way there. But Caleb Downs, I think, could have a Heisman finalist type of year. If he can put together a year like he did at Alabama a year ago, where you have more than 100 tackles, you have a couple of picks here and there, obviously you're likely going to have to do a little bit more, but if you are the leader of the best defense in the country and making the type of plays that Caleb Downs is capable of making, it gets really interesting really quickly. And then you have Will Johnson out there. He would likely need a remarkable year, to be totally honest, where he goes, 8 picks or something absolutely insane. But I do think he has the ability to make some really, really incredible plays, and possibly he's the leader of the best defense in the country at Michigan. So who knows what happens there. Also, another guy that I thought of actually like right before the show started was Harold Perkins, a linebacker from LSU, kind of the same vein of James Pierce Jr. and Abdul Carter, where you look at them not only as remarkable players, but guys that if their defense is going to be what it needs to be for them to be successful, those guys are going to be as important as anyone in the country. And they're definitely going to be huge players for those defenses. So maybe Harold Perkins puts it all together. Maybe Blake Baker puts him in the right situations finally for that kid, and he shows off his remarkable ability. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, this has kind of gone by the wayside the last couple of years with multiple different positions making their way to New York City, but there's so many good players in this group. When I look at this season, there's so much stuff to kind of pull from this overall season coming up. And when you look across the country, there is talent just sprinkled all over the field. I don't think there's a team that you're going to watch that doesn't have a really elite player on it. I don't think there's a section of the field that doesn't have a number of elite players across the country at it. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think some of this lends itself to the quarterbacks not necessarily being quite as clear-cut as they were a year ago. Obviously, that's rarely the case with the Heisman, where someone can come out of nowhere and steal the show. But the reality is there is not necessarily that solid quarterback that you feel is definitely going to be in the Heisman conversation no matter what, like there has been kind of in years past. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold. I don't necessarily know who I would pick as the three guys to represent the positions at the ceremony, but I do know running back is as deep as it possibly gets in college football this upcoming year. So many incredible players across the country that could make some noise. The wide receiver with Luther Burden and Tatoria McMillan, both those guys are going to put up insane numbers. There's no doubt about that. With them and their quarterbacks having that rapport, it's going to be insane, the numbers they're able to put up. Now, can they do enough to get to New York City? That's a whole other question. But they absolutely will be big-time players, will absolutely put up as good of numbers as anyone in the entire country across positions. So very excited for that wide receiver group. And then when you look at the defensive side of the ball, it just feels like there's so many guys that could absolutely make that leap and be the biggest, game changers for their team. James Pierce Jr., I think, leads that list, where if he walks out of the season with, 16 sacks and 22 and a half tackles for loss and some ridiculous numbers in between, I think he could be that guy. He could be the guy that you really look at. And Shedeur Sanders, another fantastic one, absolutely. Definitely someone that could get up into that conversation, especially if Colorado makes some noise this upcoming year, where people want to give Colorado a little bit of a shine. And if Shedeur Sanders can have some of that protection, he's a name that absolutely could pop up. And then, obviously, Travis Hunter is the biggest wrinkle to this. When you talk about a guy that plays both sides of the ball, that is absolutely going to play probably about 130 to 120 snaps every single game, you have the ability to be the best player in the country. I frankly think he's at least top 10 in the country when you talk about players, and he's one of the most successful two-way players we've seen in a really, really, really long time. He's someone that can totally change the game on the defensive side of the ball, and then to go score a touchdown on offense. He could literally do the entire thing for Colorado in a game. He could win a game by himself. So he's someone that I think for this prediction to come true, he might have to be there, frankly. There might have to be a defensive player that makes their way up to New York City at the end of the day. But when you look at Travis Hunter this upcoming year, he's going to put up numbers that are just going to be ridiculous. And he's going to do things that are just going to be highlight reel after highlight reel. And when you're coming from Colorado and you have Deion Sanders as your coach, they're going to want to boost that up as much as possible. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold. I think there's so many players that have their claim to possibly getting into that New York City conversation for the Heisman, but I think we're going to have a ton of really, really good players. And I think we're going to have a ton of remarkable players, not only from the big schools that are always in the conversation for the Heisman, but from Colorado with Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, from maybe Cal with Jaden Ott. You have so many different people across the country that absolutely can make some noise here. And I think we might just have a really interesting group up in New York City at the end of the year. I think that we might have 5 guys up there just because it's going to be a fascinating year with a ton of big-time players across the country. So I do think it's going to be a really interesting Heisman ceremony. I do think the battle for the Heisman is going to be really, really tough. And I think there's going to be about 5 or 6 guys that you could argue should be in New York at the end of the day. I just hope that they come from some different positions for the sake of this take. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing work across every single sport you could possibly want. So definitely come on over to GSMC and we will have you covered there. We'll have Andrew Tate and Samantha Genzer on tomorrow to talk about all of the stuff around college football and all of the craziness. But we will see you then, and thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.